6 o'clock. We're calling to order the January 20th, 2016, still labeled 2015 on my agenda, of the Carson City Airport Authority. Ms. Warren, would you make the roll call and determination of a quorum, please?
Chairperson Hutter, Vice Chair Peterson, here. Member Law, here. Member Posick, here. Member Shirk, here. Member Stotts, here. Member White. Here. A quorum is present.
Thank you. Would you all rise and join me in the Pledge of Allegiance?
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
You'll notice Chairman Hutter is not here. He called me earlier today. He's still down in Texas negotiating some kind of a big deal. The next matter on the agenda is the approval of minutes of the last meeting. We've all received a copy. There was some back and forth, and I think they were corrected. Does anybody have any questions on that? Do we have an order to accept the minutes?
I'll make a motion we approve the minutes of the last meeting as amended.
Second.
We have a motion and a second. Do we need a discussion on that, Steve? I would think not. Okay. All in favor say aye, please.
Aye.
Aye. Against? It passes by unanimous. Modification of the agenda. The chairman reserves the right to modify the agenda in order to most effectively process the agenda items. I have no modifications to the agenda at this point. In fact, it looks fairly brief. Public comment. Members of the public who wish to address the Airport Authority may speak on agendized and non-agendized matters related to the airport. Comments are limited to 3 minutes per person or topic. If your item requires extended discussion, please request the chairman to calendar the matter for a future Airport Authority meeting. Do we have any members of the public who would like to address the authority? Bill, come forward. Please state your name and sign in.
My name is Bill Hartman. I would like to comment on the speed bumps that are on the part of the airport perimeter road, I guess it's called, between the EAA building and the Weaver hangar. And of course, the reason speed bumps are there is to slow down traffic. And they don't, because everybody drives around them. So that means they don't accomplish their objective of slowing down traffic, and also they have the adverse impact of having people drive out where we really don't want them to drive. So my recommendation is the speed bumps be removed so that people will drive where they're supposed to, and hopefully they'll still maintain a reasonable speed. It could be a good time to have them removed is when the work is done on the northwest ramp, which I believe is going to be later on this year, and perhaps the contractor could remove the speed bumps at the same time they're doing the work on the northwest ramp. Thank you.
Are there any other members? Yes, come forward, please. State your name and sign in.
My name is Michael Greedy, and I second Mr. Hartman's suggestion to remove the useless speed bumps.
Do we have a third? Not seeing any more, we'll move forward with the remainder of the agenda. Thank you both. I may be your third. Public hearings. We have on the agenda a briefing on the Carson City Airport budget for fiscal year 2015-2016. This is brought forward, I guess, by Member White and Beth Kahn. Was it? That'd be correct. Go ahead.
Thank you. I'm going to defer to Beth and Tim this evening, as I've been in Colorado since last week having surgery and only just arrived a few minutes ago here in town.
Okay, you should have received in a handout of a balance sheet compared to prior year as of December 31st, 2015, a budget to actual report for the first 6 months of the year compared to the total budget, and a prior year revenue and expenses, current year and prior year.
Pardon me, do you have another copy? I did not receive a handout on that.
I do not have another copy, because Tim sent it out. Do you have any extra copies? I'm sorry. So on the balance sheet, the one thing I'd like to point out is the Airport Authority has set aside cash to cover the deferred lease revenue that you've received. And as of December 31st, you had about $361,000. And that's approximately $12,000 in excess of what's necessary because of revenue that's been recognized. So that could move to your designated reserves. The second sheet is the profit and loss.
May I ask you a question
Yes,
before you
you may.
continue? Is that something that you accrue every month, or do you periodically just visit it and sort of catch it up from time to time?
So a couple of the deferred leases are booked monthly, the land lease, and a couple are booked quarterly. So right now, they're booked, though, for the full 6 months revenue.
Okay, thank you very much.
The next sheet is the profit and loss. Yes?
Jeff, can I ask you another question?
Yep.
On the balance sheet previous year comparison under accounts receivable that we were talking about today, I see on the balance sheet as of December, as of December 31st, account 2000 showed a negative 26,1182, and then on the balance sheet previous year comparison, the December 31/15 shows a positive 26,698. Is that the same reference? Should there be a negative in front of that?
That's not the one I have in front of me. I have a positive 26,698.22 in the
Right.
current year, a positive, not a
Right.
negative.
But on the balance sheet for December 31st, 2015, it shows a negative in front of it.
No. May have been before. Oh, that's before, so that was before, so you should have this one?
Right, I do.
All
I
right,
just
so-
wondered why the difference.
So the difference was I recognized revenue, an estimated revenue for your property taxes. You receive all of that revenue in July 2016 for this whole fiscal year.
Oh.
So every quarter I go in with Tim and we book some additional revenue. But the reason it's there are some negatives that are within that accounts receivable because Cubic's paid in advance, and that's about $63,000. That's a negative because that helps Tim to bill every month the monthly lease.
So this report that I printed this evening of 1/14/16, 8:13 a.m. is not the one you're working with now?
1/19/16,
Okay. One I have is 1/14.
so that's
the
probably
latest one
before
I
I book
received.
the revenue for
Okay.
property taxes.
Okay.
Thank you.
So Tim, do you happen to have that one? The 119? Do you mind if I give that so Maurice has the updated one? Sorry, I should have brought copies. Sorry. You come look over my shoulder. Okay. Because I want to make sure you have the right budget to actual. So the second sheet is the profit and loss budget to actual. It shows the first 6 months of the year revenue and expenses in the first column. The second column is the entire year's budget and whether it's under or over budget. And we're 50% of the year through the year, so you would hope your revenue is at 50%. And if you see total income is at 52.4%, so your revenue is right in line where it needs to be. I did highlight a couple areas that are of concern. The first area is marketing and advertising. It's 55% spent, so it's something that you need to watch to make sure you don't overspend that budget line item. The next area is secretarial. You received a late bill for your secretary for prior year, plus you're going to be, you received the first 6 months and you're going to receive another bill, so you're going to be over budget this line item by about $5,000. Because it's running about $6,500, and then you received about $3,500 of a bill for prior year, just recently. So you need to make that $5,000 up. And the next area that I'm concerned about is healthcare. You're approximately 60% spent there. You're spending approximately $750 a month more than budget because Gary added his spouse when she retired. And that happened after the budget was prepared, and we did not know about that. So somehow you have to make up the revenue to cover that difference. And on the next page, one area that's a positive is that your rock sales, you received about $8,600 so far more than when you budgeted. So there's a potential to make up some of that variance. So that's your budget to actual. Any questions
So-
on any of that?
Are these numbers all in, all up to date for December 31st? Or there's still some lag coming down the line?
So it included everything that had been paid through December 31st, and I checked that the banks were reconciled by Tim. So if
Okay.
there was any accounts payable, a timing difference, like maybe the power bill or something, that might not be in here yet.
Okay. All right.
Steve, maybe you can address this. I read this today. This all happened since I was on the authority last time. Did we create a policy to cover for health cost all of the dependents of our employees?
I honestly, I don't know. I'm not familiar with that issue.
All right.
That's something we'd have to research, and maybe Tim can answer it.
I did research and went back to the minutes of when Gary was hired, and he was hired with full benefits for his spouse and family.
And can you provide, or at least direct us to the document on that? I'd like to reread the text on that motion.
I can look it up and get it to you.
Thank you, I'd appreciate that.
May I make a comment? There was a bit of a precedent back when Casey was manager. The authority made a provision to give him extra money to cover his wife's medical expenses because she was pregnant, having a baby. And that was not part of the original package that had been put together for him.
We'll probably want to agendize this at some point. We're facing some budget issues. In any business I've run, that means you start to look at everything, and particularly for those things that may have happened that were unintended. So we'll just investigate this and see if it was appropriate. If, in fact, coverage of spouses and dependents was a one-time agreement with one specific employee, not a policy, then that may bear on this. I don't have the documents at hand right now, so we'll probably agendize this as part of a budget review to be sure that we control our expenses and come out on the right side of the line on that thing. Thank you, Member Stotts. Continue, I'm sorry.
No problem. Another area that Tim had asked me to look at was you were considering possibly doing the FAA grant for approximately $3.2 million, right? Was it $3.2 million? And your share would be approximately $200,000. And I thought it was important to point out that you budgeted an ending fund balance of only $195,000. And if you spent $200,000 over and above what was in your budget, you would be negative $5,000, and you would have an illegal act, basically, because by statute, technically, you haven't budgeted, you don't have the resources to spend it, and you only have reserves of about $212,000, so it would wipe out all your reserves. So I would just, I get why you want to do it, but as a finance person, I have to caution you that you're going to have an issue with taxation.
Thank you for that. Just to remind me, on the discussion we had, Jim, as I recall, the matching money from the city or the airport is not a lump sum at the beginning of the project, but it rolls out over the course of the project. And we were anticipating that this would roll perhaps even into the next fiscal year and latch onto funds that had not yet even been budgeted.
Yeah, depending on when the grant is received from the FAA, depends on when this project would end. For instance, if it's like every other year where we get the grant in August, it takes about 3 to 4 weeks to actually enter into a contract. So then we start construction in September, and for instance, this year would have been disastrous because we'd be getting into Thanksgiving and having to shut down the project and carry it over to the next year. Now, you know, if the grant comes in earlier, we could conceivably get it done in 2016. But that's always an unknown depending on when the FAA actually issues the grant.
Well, don't forget, you're a fiscal year June 30 year end. So that means it's really 2017 you're talking about to do that, because you wouldn't start it. You know, you've had some engineering costs, but you wouldn't start it until next fiscal year, July, August.
That was kind of my point. We've
Yeah.
got this 190-something thousand in this fiscal year. We have not yet sat down and begun finding other monies in the next fiscal year, 2016, 2017. And it may well be that 5 and then some more can be found by the time that the project comes in.
And if you look at the, let's see, page 2 of the budget to actual, it shows that we typically try to budget approximately 80,000 of profit. So the revenue that you're generating from primarily your lease revenue and property taxes, you try to generate 80,000 to use towards accumulating towards that. So theoretically, you should add another in your next year's budget, 80,000. So you might be close to not having an issue with taxation, but I just need to warn you that you're close. Nope, that's all I have.
Do we have any questions from any of the members of the authority? Seeing none, Steve, do we need any public comment on this? This was just more of a briefing and update.
It's still wise to call for public comment.
All right. Do we have any members of the public that would like to come forward to speak on this matter? Seeing none, thank you very much.
thank
I
you.
suspect we'll be working closely over the next year.
Yeah, and we'll have to probably do a budget augmentation, once we figure out where that revenue is. And I just caution you to spend as little as possible in those other areas so we can move money around. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much. It's very helpful. Agenda item 2, discussion and possible action to determine a course of action based on the results of the environmental hazard inspection conducted on the terminal building, possible mitigation of the hazards, temporary relocation of the airport offices to, and it says Mountain West. Mr. Rowe, I believe this is primarily your item.
Okay, back on November 25th, as approved by the authority at the November meeting, we contracted with EICS, Environmental Inspection Control Services, Mr. Larry Thur, who came and conducted the inspection, took air samples and so on, and of course, they conducted the inspection. Just prior to that, in an initial inspection, Mr. Thur found that we had a lot of black mold in the old kitchen of the terminal, at which point we went ahead and pulled all of Gary's stuff out of there and moved him over to the office next to mine. And so we shut that off and basically boarded that room up. There's still some storage in the room next to the kitchen, but then again, we still have some black mold, and we're just using that room as sparingly as possible. We do have another issue, which is going to be commented on the next agenda item regarding what Mr. Thur refers to as the electronics room. That's where the computers and the air rink system for the AWAS is housed. But we do have some serious problems. And so I wanted Mr. Thur to comment before we went on what he found so that we can make an informed decision.
Mr. Thur, would you want to come forward and help us out, please? If you'll state your name and log in, that way we can track you down. Thank you.
Sure. My name is Larry Thur. I own Environmental Inspection and Control Service. Let me sign in here. I've owned the company since 1988, and we're in the business of, we're environmental consultants, we're industrial hygienists, and as Mr. Rowe stated, I did an inspection at the building at 2600 College Parkway, and I did find mold, visible mold. I pulled samples of it and I had it confirmed with the laboratory in about a half a dozen different places in the building, in both wings. The two biggest areas that of concern were the kitchen area, which was sealed up tight. My first visit, we found that, and that was sealed up tight afterwards. And also in what we're referring to as the electronics room, that's on the east wing right next to Mr. Rowe's office over there. At the same time, I also pulled samples of what was suspected asbestos-containing material, and turned out that there was no asbestos. Well, one sample had a trace, but below the level which is regulated. So I pulled air samples at the time just to try to determine the level of existing safety, to try to determine what the airborne fungal spore count was. And you have to understand that air samples are just a snapshot of what's going on. The levels will vary, but the airborne fungal spore count at that time was fairly low. It was pretty consistent with what you would find in any occupied building. But I have to state that in several areas there is significant mold. Just from my experience, and I've been doing this for a very long time, in my experience, I know that the ceiling area above what we're calling the electronics room, that had been subject to repeated water damage and continuous water damage. And I know that if you start to pull that sheetrock down, you're going to find a very significant amount of mold, big mold colonies in there. Also over in the other wing, in the west wing, that was also subject to a lot of repeated water damage. And the cause of all this is, I'm sure you've been over this before, is the roof. It's a bad roof. It's just a poor design. I don't know if it's a level of maintenance. It was just a poor design, and it wasn't constructed properly. So I made the recommendations to have a remediation contractor come in. He would set up containments, sealed containments, to remove the sheetrock from those different ceiling areas. Obviously, the kitchen was the worst of all, but to remove the ceiling from that, and that way you could get a better look from the underside of what is going on up underneath that roof up there. But I suspect you're going to find very significant water damage up there, and if you're going to continue to use that building, it's going to require, in my view, I'm not a general contractor, but in my view, you're going to have to redesign and put a whole new roof structure on it.
Thank you. Tim, just for my information, how long have you been in that building? I don't actually know.
I've been in it for 5 years. I believe that Casey was in it while he was a manager for 2 years, roughly, however long he was manager. And then it was used by Dirk prior to that for as long as he was there, and I really don't recall how long he was in there. So it had been used for approximately the last 7, 8 years.
And did you notice roof leaks during your time there?
We've had continuous roof leaks. They have gotten worse, and this year especially, because we've had so much rain and snow, it has escalated. Last year we had very little rain, snow, and so we saw it. We just put the buckets under and lived with it. But it was a predominantly dry year, and we didn't think anything of it until this year when we decided we had to have this looked at.
So if I understand you right, there's been no effort under your tenure to look at the condition of the roof and to make repairs on it?
Oh, since I have been the manager, Gary has resealed the roof about 4 times. And I asked him a while back, he has used the sealer, 75 gallons of sealant on that roof. And it's a tremendous amount, and we don't know what to do because the roof is such a complicated structure. When it was built, it had eaves over the main part of the terminal, the round part, but the addition wings had no eaves. So the water just finds its own gravity and finds its way inside. So yeah, we have done what we could with what we had, but it's gotten out of control.
I guess my point is we brought in a inspection and remediation, and now we're looking at who knows what cost as a part of temporary or who knows what relocation. Have you sought out expert advice, review on rebuilding the roof and to a completely sound condition?
We've had 2 separate quotes. I have a stepson who's a contractor, or was a contractor. He gave one quote of $25,000 or more. We've had it, assuming that we had hazardous materials, up to $50,000. So we're looking at $25,000 plus for a new roof, but since we don't have a problem with asbestos, that will kind of eliminate using a hazmat team to come in and clean up asbestos. But we're looking at, I can only get a quote, but I don't know. It's going to be in excess of $25,000 to replace the roof, and possibly a lot more.
Right. It just under kind of the heading of a penny saved, you know. So I would rather perhaps we'd looked at this in the past. We haven't. But I'd also like to think you'd want to be, as a part of an ongoing broader review, want to have a really good handle on what we're facing up there if the right solution long-term is replacing the roof as opposed to relocating the offices temporarily, permanently, whatever the expenses and the electrics, all the rest of that stuff. I'm a little uncomfortable. I mean, we have more to discuss here that is agendized, but in the absence of that information, I'm feeling a little underinformed on it. So I think we're going to want to look at the real cause of the problem. And as you said, the remediation, it may well be that we have to go in there and take that down. Because the alternative seems to be kind of an unspoken assumption of abandoning the building or tearing it down. Is that kind of where you're coming to on this?
Well, we're looking at a building also that's 55-plus years old, a basic cinder block building. And the roof, we're going to have to probably bring it up to code. I'm afraid that we have single pane untempered glass throughout the terminal, which is not of a standard size. So my guess is, yeah, we could probably replace the roof, $25,000, $30,000, but to bring it up to code with tempered glass, so on and so forth, I think that we're getting beyond what the building is worth. So, but yeah, I can look at replacing, get some quotes to replace the roof, see what it's going to cost. Mr. Thur had quoted me at just a rough quote of approximately $10,000 to $12,000 to mitigate what's the mold that's already there. But Mr. Thur also told me that we can mitigate it, but without replacing the roof, it's kind of a moot point.
Before I continue down that path, this is your agenda. What is your proposal at this point, given what we have today?
Well, because the center portion of the terminal is dry, we don't have a problem so much with that. The bathrooms seem to be okay. I don't believe we have any mold in there.
The bathrooms were just fine. And if I can interject, I had given you that estimate for that $10,000 to $12,000, and it would probably be a bit less than that. There's no asbestos to deal with in there, so it would probably be a little bit less than that. I'm not a remediation contractor, but I'm obviously been around it a lot, and from what I know, I think probably closer to $8,000 might be an accurate number for the mold remediation.
How is the conditions in Tim's office at this point? In that little
they seem to be fine in his office.
His office is fine, the central area is fine, the bathrooms are fine.
Yes, sir. Okay. Just that electronics room in between the round building in his office, that was of concern. And of course, the other wing over there, that was very significant concern.
Okay, thank you.
One of the things that I was thinking of doing, we can still continue to use the round part of the building for certain functions because there's not a danger there. But I have looked at options to, at least temporarily, move my office and Gary to Mountain West, northwest side of the airport. Received a quote, and Steve Takis has also received a quote from Michael Golden for $250 a month, including utilities. Of course, we'd have to pay for phone installation, that sort of thing. But that is a viable option right now. There's no other space available on the airport for airport offices. And we can just shut the wing down and like I said on the next agenda item, we'll talk about the AWAS system. But that, we really have a problem. And because of the leak in the electronics room, we now are seeing problems with, the carpet soaked. We put buckets under, but there's more than just 2 leaks. And we need to address that, and so we're starting to see a lot of, mildew. The carpet soaked. It's starting to smell. So it's really not in great shape right now.
Again, I wasn't here when that position was created. Would you give me a brief description of Gary's duties, please?
Gary is the maintenance technician on the airport. He maintains the lights, the lighting system, mows the weeds, snow removal. I also help with that. And general maintenance all around the airport. He does an extraordinary job of keeping the airport manicured. He's done a lot of remediation with the ditches when we have erosion problems, a lot of moisture. We pulled rocks out of the rock pile for riprap in the ditches to avoid erosion. Just about everything that can be done on the airport, Gary has been available to take care of it. He's done an exemplary job.
Well, the reason I ask, it sounds like his work is not in the building. It's out of the building elsewhere, and that to the extent he's in the building, perhaps we have too much people. If he is in an office 3 hours a day on an 8-hour job, then really he's not doing what you've just described full time. But if he's not there, if he's out all day long doing that kind of stuff, then a dedicated office for him strikes me as perhaps being something kind of on the optional list. Coordination, file keeping and whatnot could be in your office. And what I'm hearing is the central part, the bathrooms in your office are fine. We've got some mildew and smell things that need to be dealt with. I'm guessing that there is snow on the top, or at least was until perhaps today or yesterday, snow on top of the building that either was left to stand and not removed. I'm not hearing what sounds like a dire need to move or to accommodate an office for Gary. What am I misunderstanding on this?
Gary does also a lot of research on parts, equipment, things that he needs to work with. And because of the nature of the shutdown of the west side of the building, he lost his shop. Now he's doing things outside that he was doing inside. So yeah, he does do a lot of research for me. He makes whatever contacts he needs to make to have the equipment, order the equipment to get his job done. So yeah, he's in and out. He does a lot of work outside. And I think I see where you're going with this. I am inclined, and I think I've already decided to do it. It's becoming a problem in the east side of the building with my office and the office next to me. It's getting almost too dangerous to be in there, and I want to move.
Okay, I'm going on the fellow you hired to come in and tell us that your office was fine. There seems to be some discrepancy between your assessment and his, and the urgency of a desire needs to be substantiated before we make that decision. But Member Law, you have a question.
Yes, Tim, part of the reason for that is with Gary moving into the office adjacent to yours and the increased weather issue, is that what's causing you the desire to move out of that area now that the mildew is becoming an issue and that sort of thing?
Yes, that's a major part of it.
Okay, also, does Gary maintain equipment and tools and that sort of thing? Did he maintain that in the west side of the building? And so those tools and the accoutrements of his job are what has now been moved to the office next to you and would be required regardless of where he was located to have a base for his work.
Tool storage and equipment are still on the west side of the building. The computer and his phone has moved to the office next to mine.
Thank you.
Is it your proposal, and have you addressed if you and Gary go to Mountain West, is there tool storage space there and workspace? You said a shop, or is that going to be an additional expense over what you've estimated here?
Well, I have not addressed that yet. I've made recommendations in my briefing of possible scenarios. We are only interested right now in vacating the terminal. And we will both share an office at the northwest side and at Mountain West. The tools and equipment storage area will still be on the west side of the terminal.
Member White.
If the center of the terminal is still fit for occupation, could you and Gary move to the center of the terminal, some manner or fashion of partitions or whatever you need to secure what you need to take care of your operation there in the center of the terminal? Because I understand with your office being on the end and where Gary is currently housed being compromised, we don't need to be passing through that compromised area to get in and out of the terminal, or get in and out of your office. So is it possible to move both you and Gary to the center of the terminal?
It is not secured. I have an alarm system in our offices on the east side of the building, which protects files, computer, other things we have in there of a high security nature. Out in the terminal, no, we wouldn't have that protection. The terminal main part is accessible by the public from the ramp side.
I'm not sure whose light that is. Is that you, Steve?
Yep.
Mr. Posick.
Nobody's brought up the health issues to the employees traipsing through this stuff every day. I know I wouldn't want to be in there if there was mold in there, even though it's possibly habitable. I'm thinking that it would be in the best interest to get those employees out of there before we face health issues we're going to have to pay for.
I wanted to make the point that in consideration of the type of weather we're going through this winter, which seems to be a lot of snow and a lot of rain, and I take it that roof is still leaking into the electronics room. Is that correct?
That's correct.
To be honest, I think that it's just a matter of time before that whole ceiling drops and hits the floor. And then you really do have a major health issue.
Any other questions or comments by authority members? Steve, do we want to invite the public up to talk to us on this at this point? Any members of the public that care to address the authority on this subject? Thank you.
Any further questions for me?
You might hang out. It could come up.
Okay, I'll continue.
My frustration at this point is what I think we've been asked to deal with is what's described as a temporary move. To me, a temporary move is what you do because you have a planned project to deal with a circumstance, and then you plan to move back into it when it's addressed. And this sounds to me like sort of a sudden, let's run out of here because it's gotten nasty. We don't like being here anymore, and I'm not arguing whether it's pleasant or not. But without a plan to deal with the problem that caused it, which I guess is the roof, and an extended period of what we'll call deferred maintenance. And we're facing a budget crisis. So we're always looking for a balance between doing the right job on a budget that we can tolerate. And sometimes what the budget can tolerate means, well, we have to go fix something now instead of, well, let's go spend more money and think about fixing it in the future. You'd mentioned, the possibility of doing a whole new roof. Well, that may well be necessary, and maybe we don't have the money for it. But then you've also mentioned cinder block walls and non-spec windows, and that's all an assumption whether that would be brought to code. I don't think I doubt there's anybody in the airport, including me, that wouldn't like to have a nice new modern terminal building. But that hasn't been put on the table. And if it was, I'm not sure where the money would come from for it right now. And it may well be that it needs to be on the table, and we need to find a planning mechanism to get us there. So I'm not actually arguing that that's a lovely thing down there. But I'm uncomfortable that we seem to just be making a knee-jerk, supposedly temporary response for something that might well have been headed off 2, 3, 4 years ago through a process to completely rebuild the roof, get the remediation done before it got wet, and then we wouldn't be having this problem today. So having said that, and I realize there may as yet be a motion, but what I'm hearing you say is you want to move you and Gary to an office for $250 a month, plus the installation of telephones. Do you have a cost for us on relocating all the electrical equipment? Is there a rental for where it's going to and the cost to get it there?
No. I'm sorry, I take that back. Yes, the Sterling Air has offered to place the AWAS computers and AirRink radios in an electronics room in his hangar at no cost to the airport. The cost would come from the relocation by All Weather, who is our contractor who maintains the AWAS system, of approximately just less than $4,000. But that does include antennas and some coax. We can probably get away with not buying the antennas because we can probably reuse what we have. I don't know about the coax cables. But it would be a cost probably to transfer the phone system that operates the AirRink and ties into the radon system of the AWAS, which provides the weather service its information. But everything is right there tied to the electronics room so it'll be at ease of moving that equipment. We've got access to a lift to get to the roof of Sterling Air to install the antennas, and the coax would be no problem tying into the electronics room because it's right up towards the top of the building. So that would be the easy part. The expense is from All Weather to reinstall the equipment and get it recertified with the FAA.
And you're saying that they provided a quote or estimate of about $4,000 for that?
That's correct. That's including coax and antennas. So I might be able to cut that down if they can reuse the antennas and most of the coax. We can eliminate some of that cost.
And this is an offer for free storage in perpetuity from Mr. Lewis, or for a while? I'm not clear. Is he saying, yes, you can come over here forever?
That's in perpetuity.
Steve, just a piece of history here. Doesn't Steve's business over there house our Unicom facility? Sterling Air?
Unicom, yes, the Unicom obligation is in the Sterling Air lease.
And we pay him for that, is that correct?
No, it's a condition of his lease. So, when his lease rate was negotiated, that was one of the things that he had to do to get the rate that was ultimately negotiated.
Was there any specification that it actually be manned and that responses and Unicom duties be provided, or was it just the housing of the equipment?
No, I think there was an obligation that it be manned. I'd have to pull up the lease and just see what that was, but I know there was a discussion about that when we renegotiated it. Can I just throw one other question out there? And I'm just throwing an idea out here, but if the AWAS equipment was simply moved to the other side of the wall that it's on, so that it was on the inside of the center of the terminal building instead of behind the door, and maybe a cage or something be put around it to secure it, would we still have those relocation costs associated with AWAS?
There would be a cost involved, but I don't know what that would be.
If it needs saying, Tim, $4,000 is a real number for an organization that's struggling to get the numbers to come out. Sounds like a small thing, and a big company, it would be something that would disappear into the woodwork. But we need to find every means to minimize the economic impact on us. This is going to be a serious issue, I think, over the next few months. I don't know that it needs an action because we haven't gotten that far, but perhaps you could get a quote from your guys on, as Steve said, just moving it to a dry, secure, safe, non-wet part of the building and caging it in a way that's secure. Could be in a big metal box or something with a lock on it. Again, in the absence of any more members having any questions or statements, and we don't have any public commentary, we're at a point where if there is a motion that somebody cares to make, we'll entertain this. I'm sorry, Member Stotts, go ahead.
Yeah, you mentioned that the airborne mold count was about average for most buildings. Is that correct?
It was very typical of almost all occupied buildings, commercial or residential.
Is that all occupied buildings that have a mold problem, or just all occupied buildings, period?
All occupied buildings that have no mold problem. Now, the levels that I found, as I stated, those are a snapshot. Depends on atmospheric conditions, wind, temperature, so forth. But they went very, very much from the levels that I did find. I think I have them here. Just a second, I'll kind of discuss this a little bit. The total spore count in the east office area was 53. That's actually a little on the low side. And in the west shop area was 40. So typically we'll find them from down low like that up into, 600, 700, 800. And that's very common in almost any occupied building.
What is the range from being normal to being hazardous?
Probably the level where you start being of concern, it depends mostly with mold spores on not only the numbers, but also on the genus or the genera of fungal spores. And once we start getting over 12 or 1,300, I start getting concerned. In particular, we're looking for several different species that are very significant. One being Stachybotrys, which I don't know if any of you have been around mold much, but Stachybotrys is one of them. Stachy never showed up here. An elevated level of what did show up here, of course, is Penicillium aspergillus. And in these counts, these are very typical of what you'll find in any building. But once you start getting PA, Penicillium aspergillus, once you start getting that over 800, 900, then you start getting concerned.
Is one of these genus or these species less hazardous than the others? Is like some people could have a room full and it wouldn't bother them at all, whereas there's a certain species that would send them to the hospital?
You bet, absolutely. And the genus that we find here, ascospores, PA in low numbers. Cladosporium is the most common, and Basidio spores, those are the most common fungi in the whole world. That's what rots away all your dead plants and everything that are laying out in the bushes. If you were to go on a good windy day and go out into the desert out there and pull air samples, and you could have some very, very high fungal spore counts from well, not only cladosporium, but basidiospores, ascospores, and acromonium and so forth, and some Penicillium aspergillus. You could get some real high numbers with that too on a good windy day out in the dry desert. But like I said, the spore counts that we have here were very low. These were very low. So at that point, no significant damage. Now, to add to that, if that ceiling does come down, that's getting wet continuously, if that hits the floor, all bets are off. You're going to have some serious fungal spore counts. You can count on it.
I've got one thing I'd like to add at this point. When I spoke to Carl about this agenda item, we agreed to go over there when he gets back in town and take a look and try to get a firsthand sense of what Tim's talking about. And I say that because I fully sympathize. That is not the greatest environment to go to work every day. There's a lot of nicer buildings, even in airports around here. But it's a different thing to have what isn't the nicest office and having something that will and can be made to work if we do what we say back home, if we cowboy up and clean it up and do what we can and dry it up and, get after the roof and do what we can there, find a budget to fix that. So I'll just say that my inclination, and I'll leave it to anybody else who might want to make a motion on this, would be for Carl and I, anybody else who cares to come, to go take a look at this and see if we can identify some quick ways to bring it back into a shape that we can live with. That might include moving the electrics into a longer-term storage space. Maybe it is out from underneath the roof that's going to collapse and it's in a lockable cage. I have heard the man that Tim hired to tell us that Tim's office is not in a moldy situation. No telling right now, as wet as it is, how it's going to smell in there. This is a little unusual for this part of the world. So I acknowledge there's work that needs to be done over there, but I'm not hearing a convincing argument that it justifies an expensive and open-ended move, telephone systems and all these sorts of things. Anyway, I've committed with Carl and I to get over there as soon as he gets back in town, whether that's tomorrow or the next day, I don't know. He's down in, I believe it's in Dallas right now. So I'll just toss that out. It's worth looking at, but I'm not sure that it's worth spending the money to move or $4,000 to relocate the electrics all the way across. Steve, go ahead.
I just wanted to respond to your question on the Unicom. The lease says tenant shall operate the Unicom service for aircraft in accordance with FAA and FCC rules and regulations. Landlord has furnished the Unicom equipment to tenant without cost on a loan basis. Tenant agrees to return all loaned Unicom equipment in good condition, considering normal wear upon termination of the lease.
Again, I don't mean to launch that right now. I've never, ever had a Unicom response at Carson City. So that's another question. But it occurred to me because if we're going to go put more equipment over there where we're already not having terms of an agreement made or met, kind of makes me worry. Member Stotts, sorry.
I just have a question for Tim. Does Mountain West, would they expect you to sign a lease with a certain, like a year's lease on it, or would they let you move back out of there once the problem was rectified over in the terminal building?
We just tonight received I guess it's a proposal to rent the office from Michael Golden at Mountain West. I have not had a chance to read it because like I said, I received it just prior to the meeting. We will look it over, but the rent for the office is $250 per month, all utilities paid. The only expense to us would be to transfer the phone system and the fax over to the, actually the one phone number for the office phone and a fax number over to that location. All the moving will be done by Gary and I. So that the furniture and office desks are already supplied by Mountain West, so we really don't have to do very much but move files. But yeah, that's as far as I know, it's going to be month to month. It may be a yearly lease. I don't know. I haven't read it.
maybe I can respond to that. We just got this, it's just a letter from Michael Golden, and we just got it a few minutes before the meeting started tonight. And so I just saw it while I was sitting here. But it's just simply offers to rent space at $250 a month, terms to be determined. So, and utilities that we will be required to install at our expense, all communications, including but not limited to telephone and internet service. Any networking to be installed must be coordinated with their staff. So it's just an offer right now. I mean, the details, there are no details really, other than the $250 a month. And the space, I guess, has already been shown to Tim. It's the northeast corner on the ground level.
Again, any member here can come forward. My position is to delay this agenda item 1 month so that any of us ought to go. But at this point, Carl has agreed to go with me to look at the situation and to see if firsthand what the alternatives appear to be. It sounds to me like the health issue, although it's something we absolutely have to look at, is not dire. It may not smell great. It certainly doesn't look that great. But I'm suggesting that we delay this for 1 month so that Carl and I, and anybody who wants to come along, go over and take a look at this. We don't have an actual offer from Michael Golden at this point, and I think it's a reasonable question. If Michael says, well, it's got to be 12 months or nothing, we want to know that before we commit to that agreement at this point. If a $4,000 move can be turned into a $300 relocation inside, that money might be significant to us. We heard that we might be $5,000 short on matching money. I mean, that's the kind of money we're talking about here. So I put that to the members, but if any of you have another direction you want to take, my suggestion is we delay this 1 month and then go over and dig into this thing firsthand.
Be real honest with you, I don't think we have a month. We have to make some kind of motion that says upon inspection by the board members that this can be initiated before a month is up. With the rains that we've been having, I suspect that that won't last a month.
That was basically the same thing I was going to say.
So it would be acceptable to the authority that we grant the power to, well, we have open meeting issues here, but what I'm thinking about is that Carl and I, and again, whoever else wants to come, go take a hard look at this and try to answer the question is, do we have enough time to do remediation right now that makes that building remain tenable for a period of time, get us through the winter and get into the summer and look at a broader scope? And if the answer is no, then go ahead and carry on with the temporary relocation that Tim is proposing. I'm not sure how we would carry that off. Steve, you got a comment? Member Law?
I do have one other question of Larry. In the area that was the kitchen that has the black mold on the ceiling that's visible,
Yes.
were the spore rates higher there than it was in the tool room?
I did not pull air sample in that area. That area, we left it sealed up.
Okay.
I would be absolutely certain that those airborne fungal spores in that area would be quite high. It was a very large area that was covered with mold, and there was just no getting around it. It would have been very, very high. Let me throw this out, and this is only as a temporary measure, and you may want to consider, if you don't want to go with that move that Mr. Rose was speaking about, you might want to consider just on the corrective action over in that, what we're discussing as the electronics room. Get that remediated. That's a few $1,000s job. It's probably in the vicinity of just the remediation, probably $2,500, $3,000. And then correct the roof problem over there to get that sealed up nice and tight over there so that that area is habitable.
That's kind of my point. If there are things that can be done in a digestible size that avoids a move and relocation of the electrical equipment and leave us intact towards a drier month when we can do something far more serious with the roof, that kind of appeals to me. I appreciate Member Posick's comments. You've been over there more recently than I have, and we certainly don't want the roof coming down and blowing out all the equipment. I get the downside's pretty dire. Again, I can't say whether I'll be over there tomorrow because I'm just going to have to wait till Carl gets back into town. But is this job that you're talking about, the $2,000 or $3,000 job remediation, is that within your scope of tasks that you are able and willing to do?
I don't do remediation, but in my experience, that's probably the range you'd be looking at. You would have air samples and for clearances and so forth, and have the remediation company come down. So I would give myself even a little fat and say, let's go up to $3,500, but I don't think it would get up in that range. I think it would probably be in the neighborhood of $3,000 by the time the smoke clears to get the remediation. But then you still have to deal with the roof, and stopping the rain from coming through.
Member White, I think you were first.
A couple of questions. Larry, in the west wing, we understand the kitchen is compromised, but the tool area where Gary's storage and everything was, is that still habitable, in your opinion?
The last I looked at it, it was still habitable. Water runs down the wall. It would be the north-facing wall. It runs down the wall because there's no eave, and you
Right.
get ice dams that build back up. And what's happening is mold is forming on the paint.
Okay.
There's certain kinds of paint that will host mold, so it is forming on the paint. It would be useful as, I suppose, for tool storage area and that sort of thing. Go in, get your tools, get out. I wouldn't want to sit around that room all day, every day.
Okay.
Myself, I definitely would not want to do that. But,
Okay.
And it has to be addressed sooner or later. There's no
Thank you.
question about it, but that's something that could be put off.
Tim, earlier you mentioned that the east and west wings are additions to the center terminal?
That was my understanding, yes. I don't know whether they were built at the same time.
Okay.
I believe they probably were. I wasn't here.
I'm seeing a head nod to my left.
But my understanding was the last time any work was done on the roof was in 1978, and I don't know the facts of that, of what may have happened in 1978.
When I moved here in '75, it was in the same condition it is now. It had both wings on it.
Okay, that's the way I remember it as a small child as well.
I don't know of any roof that would last that long.
Theoretically, if that's an addition, that if that east wing is an addition, perhaps roof repair on the east wing only would be enough to satisfy this health concern.
Member Law, you had your light on.
Is it a requirement that the terminal building be open to the public? Can it be made secure so that they can move into the center portion of it till we get this done?
No, there's no this is Steve Takis, Airport Council. There's no requirement that we make that terminal building available to the public. For a long time, it was not available to the public. You certainly remember, as I do, Hagel's Restaurant was very successful in there. And then there was a bakery in there at one point. There have been a lot of businesses where that building was only available to the public as customers of a business, and it was not available as a terminal building. When we changed airport managers from Yvonne Weaver to, I think Dirk was the next airport manager, he was hired in part to renovate that building, to turn it into airport offices. And at that point, the building really became available to the public. You know, we used it as a kind of pilot lounge and bathroom accessory, but there's no legal requirement that we do so. And so we could certainly do what you've just suggested, which is close off both wings if that was appropriate, move the airport offices to the center section. You would probably want to address in some way bathroom usage, maybe porta potties or something, for transient pilots. But you're not legally required to do that either. I'm just saying there are some practical considerations.
Okay, just a thought. I'm a pilot. I won't be coming to this airport if I don't have access of some sort to sit down, use the bathrooms, restrooms. I know the medevac people use that building 3, 4, 5 nights a week when they're parked here waiting for patients. And so Tim could move his office over there, but then we're going to have to build a secure room for him and the equipment. So we're going to spend money whether we do what he's suggesting or what we're suggesting, is all I'm saying.
The only thing I would add to that is, having recently been in the El Aero facility that's on the south side of the field, it's a much more comfortable lounge for pilots than that terminal building has ever been and probably ever will be. And so if you're looking for a lounge area, that might be a discussion to have with Mountain West.
Well, just so you know that Carson Aviation Adventures has taken that lease, and I'm responsible for keeping that lobby the way it is today. We've done a lot of work in there to make it sociable for people, but that remains to be seen.
You did a great job, because I was just there the other day. I think it's very comfortable over there.
Just to be clear, the office area you're talking about, Mr. Rowe, that's up at the main facility on the north side of the field, or in the southern building that they have down there?
My first thought when I figured out that we'd probably have to make a move was to try the south side. That's when I learned that Carson Aviation Adventures had leased the whole lean-to. Then we looked at Sterling, and I didn't think that was adequate because it was upstairs. And the other one was Mountain West. And it is the northwest corner office with street access. There's a door leading right to the street, so I thought that might be pretty user-friendly for folks who want to come into the airport office. They won't have to go through the FBO. They can come right into that office.
I think you meant to say northeast corner, right?
I meant to say the northeast corner.
Yeah, okay.
It's the other west.
Let's try this on for size. I'm going to make it up as I go. A motion to approve a temporary office move pending a review of the contract offered by Mr. Golden, and to secure and relocate the radio electrical equipment in the existing offices as required, minimizing the budget impact where possible, and that this action be subject to an inspection by members of the authority to confirm the urgency and whether a delay is reasonable prior to enacting this motion.
I'm back again. Seems to me like we're jumping between these two different agenda items. Are we going to have separate votes on each one? Being relocating the AWAS is the next agenda item. I don't know where we're going. We got to do each one separately.
Fair enough. It all seemed to me much the same thing. It's all precipitated by the same condition. I don't necessarily want to get into it's okay for him to move his pencils and his paper and his printer. It's all the move. Steve, I don't know about you, since it's two agenda items.
You can combine the two items for the discussion and consideration if that's most efficient for you guys.
Well, I just did.
Okay.
Does anybody care to second or show an alternative?
Do we need a deadline for the inspection of the premises? Do you want to include that by such and such date?
I'm fine with that. I can't speak to when Carl's going to get back, and I'd certainly like to have his presence. I'd like to say that no later than Monday of this coming week, that whatever the date is, 20-something. 25th.
Was there a second to the motion? I can see the record. Okay.
Not yet.
Maybe add a day to that, just in case Carl gets delayed, say Tuesday or Wednesday of next week. That gives you a little cushion then.
How about a week from today?
1 week from today?
Yeah.
That works for me.
Two questions. If enough of the board members agree to this, then is Carl needed to be included, or can the other board members handle this situation?
The only thing I'm including him is I spoke to him about it. He is the chairman, and he can do some things under his mantle as chairman that individual members, we're just members, we get to vote. and my motion is a contingent approval. And so, and I'm not, I mean, Steve might want to speak to this. If we go over there and it looks like a day and a half of work for 4 or 5 Cub Scouts, then we would delay the move. If it looks like, no, the ceiling's going to fall down in about the next, 2 days, then the motion has been passed here and we get on with it. But I feel like we do need to go look at this firsthand before pulling the trigger on it.
Okay. I guess, could we have the secretary read that to us? No? I'm not exactly sure what he said.
Here's what I think. That the board approve a relocation in response, temporary relocation, as proposed by Manager Rowe, pending an inspection by members of the authority to confirm the urgency, and that all such moves be contingent upon a review of the contract provided by Mr. Golden, and done with an effort to minimize cost impacts.
Within a week.
And that the inspection will be done within a week of today. Today's date.
I second the motion.
Do we have any commentary from other members of the authority?
Do we need to state that that is a combination of the 2 items specifically?
I named them specifically. I would think that we don't need to mention that it's lumping to agenda items.
I don't think that has to be added, but I think you should probably allow for additional public comment if there is any, because when we called for public comment earlier, I think we were only talking about the first item. But beyond that, I think you can combine them.
Well, we have a motion and a second. I would invite at this point any public commentary on what we're trying to accomplish. Go ahead.
If you're going to be doing this inspection over there by next Tuesday, I'm going out of town next Wednesday, but if you're going to do it by next Tuesday, I don't mind coming down to join you to inspect, and I won't even charge you for the visit.
After the meeting, would you come up and give me a phone?
Sure. You bet. I'll get a business card there and give you.
That'd be fine. That'd be fine. And we have a member wanting of the public to come make a comment. Please join us at the podium. Give your name and sign in.
My name is Michael Greedy. I'm already signed in. Procedural recommendation I'd make to this body is schedule a meeting on this subject in 2 weeks, single agenda item, primarily because I've heard 5 or 6 or 7 various courses of action. The second one, I believe the motion is a violation of the open meeting law because it's made a reference to a document that is not publicly available prior to the meeting, i.e. this thing that Tim received just before the meeting.
Steve, you got a comment on that?
To the extent items are received late, there's no requirement under the Nevada open meeting law that we somehow go back in time and make them available earlier. The open meeting law manual expresses that items can be introduced at any time during a meeting. And frequently, that is the way things come in when they come in from the public. Mr. Golden apparently was planning on being here and doing it, but he literally emailed a letter, and I read to you almost the entire content of the letter because it's very short during the meeting. So I do not perceive any open meeting law violation. In terms of your motion, I think your motion was relatively clear. I don't think it requires an additional meeting. If you wanted to have additional meeting, of course, you can always do that. But I think that having another meeting would be kind of counterproductive to the approach that you're taking, which would allow for a very immediate action if you saw a health or some other danger. So
I do appreciate your suggestion. I was sitting here trying to think about how we would schedule another meeting, simply to keep it all clean and neat. I'm all for that. I have no problem with it. I do also appreciate our council's comment that the goal of this quick inspection is to pull the trigger or not pull the trigger. And we're making the decision tonight, or at least it's moved to make the decision, to make the move, unless there's a plan that makes it not necessary. So I think the action's in place that wouldn't require an additional vote. Not that I'm against to it, but then we would have to get a quorum there and probably in the middle of the week sort of a thing. So do you see a problem with not having another agendized meeting?
No, I don't see a problem with not having another meeting.
Member Law.
The one thing I would add to the motion is that that the report be brought back to the next meeting.
I'm happy to accept that amendment. I'm happy to accept it as seconded. No other comment? I think we're ready for a vote. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Against? Passed unanimously. Thank you. We will try to do what we can for you, Tim. I get that it feels urgent over there, but sometimes there's compromises. We just need to find out what we can do. So that's items 2 and 3, which we have successfully lumped together. Item 4, discussion and possible action to adopt and publish a modified traffic pattern for the Carson City Airport. This is a Timro item. I wanted to make a comment in advance that, and I've had a little exchange with Steve prior to this, my training and the training which theoretically I'm allowed to teach as an instructor, a traffic pattern at an uncontrolled airport is not a defined thing. Behaviors in the traffic pattern are, and the FAA has language on it must be left turns unless otherwise designated. Altitudes are not specified. Distances from the runway are not specified. So it seems to me, and I wasn't at this meeting, and Steve, you may end up commenting on it too, is what we're really looking to do is to publish an informational thing, whether that's a map or in the airport directory, specifying what our recommended noise abatement procedures are and the recommended altitudes. Steve, is that kind of your take on this?
That's my understanding. And the other thing that we would do if you approve the new graphics that have been presented is the next step was we would go in and amend Title 19 because we currently have on pages 30 and 31 of Title 19 on the airport regulations, we actually have a map out there right now. And during that meeting, there was some criticism of that map, and I thought it was decent criticism given that I did this map a long time ago when mapping tools were very limited. Google Earth had just hit the scene, and so the maps that are in here are kind of rudimentary. I mean, they do show the left-hand pattern for 2.7 and the right-hand pattern for 9er and the different entry points. However, I will grant you that the chart that either Tim or Bill or whoever else with that FAA safety team developed are much more attractive. They're clearer to look at. They will not be appearing in an airport facility directory because, as you know from looking at your airport facility directories, you don't see traffic pattern maps in it. What you could see is you could see the narrative, you know, and certainly you'll see the narrative that says runway 9 is a right-hand pattern because that's non-standard. But if you approve it, we could certainly post it on the web page and wherever else Tim would like to post it. That's my understanding. The other thing is, when that meeting was called for, I think it got a lot of people attending because it said change to the airport traffic pattern, and most of us think, whoa, it's left-hand pattern for 2.7 and right for 9er. They're changing that, but in fact, I think what they were trying to do is educate the flying public that if you're in the pattern, for example, flying the left pattern for 2.7, and you're flying in a light twin or single engine, and there's a jet who also reports they're in the pattern, they're probably going to be above you and to the right of you. And if there's a light sport airplane flying in the pattern reporting, they're probably going to be below you and to the left of you. And so the idea is, in part, to alert pilots where you should be looking. Now, they don't necessarily have to be there. As you know from any flight lessons that you've gotten, different flight instructors teach different techniques, and different pilots like different techniques. Some pilots like to fly their patterns in really close with the logic that if they have an engine failure, they're most likely to make the pattern. Some of them fly them a little further out, in part because it's a time management. There's a lot of things to do. There's different considerations. So you could still end up with pilots who are in different types of aircraft being in different places in the pattern. But I think part of the beauty of their drawing is to kind of give you an idea where you expect to see them. There was one aspect about it that I talked to one of the presenters at that meeting about, and that is they show the single engine airplane like my Bonanza in the red area, and the light sport at 3/4 of a mile from the runway, and the light sport at a 1/2 a mile from the runway. Well, I'm fairly good at judging distances, but I couldn't tell you the difference between a 1/2 a mile and 3/4 of a mile when I'm in the pattern. And so I don't think that, and of course his response is, well, we're not trying to tell you you have to be exactly there. This is more of an illustration as to where to expect to see someone. Now, Bill Schroeder is here, who is one of the finest flight instructors that I've ever had the experience to be with. And he may want to address it as well, because he is part of the FAA safety team.
Is this your slide?
Yes.
And then it's your turn.
Well, basically, Steve mentioned everything that I was going to address. Nothing changes as far as the traffic pattern. The voluntary noise abatement procedure is still the same. Nothing has changed there. Headings, altitudes are all the same. The minor changes are that when what that was discussed at the safety meeting was to make sure that when someone is communicating on the radio, for instance, a light sport versus a twin Cessna or whatever, make it known what type of aircraft you are so someone else entering the pattern would know what to look for. And basically this is all it is we want to make sure that everybody watches out for the other guy for safety reasons. The traffic patterns, like you said, doesn't change. Left turns for runway 27, right for runway 9. The AFD does depict a right traffic for runway 9. But we don't have anything on the noise abatement procedure, nor do I really intend to put anything in there unless so directed. But yes, I think that we should amend Title 19 with this graphic or a graphic similar. This isn't written in stone. And also place it on the website just as a recommendation for people who might be interested to take a look. We don't expect outside transient pilots to really pay attention to it, but it's really for us. And so if somebody else looks at it and pays attention to it, then that's a plus. But this is the recommendation to adopt this and publish it for the website and to publish it in Title 19. And Bill, if you'd like to add.
Bill coming up. While Bill's coming up, there are signs at either end talking about the noise abatement, which I would have thought was almost the most important element on the table right now, because the pattern's the pattern, is in that it's whatever you want it to be as the pilot, consistent with the operating standards given by the FAA, right turns and left turns and so on. I'm a little concerned, and I'm almost wondering if the action on Title 19 may not be to remove the map, because that's a regulation. And we had a guy here not long ago who had reviewed something, and he says, there's airplanes over my house lower than they are required to be by your rules. Well, that's not something that's a rule to us. I mean, if you can't climb whatever the gradient is, then you're just going to be where you're going to be. So I'm almost wondering if the action isn't just to be sure that our recommendation for noise abatement and whatever guidance or recommendation signs is in whatever we're going to call a terminal at some point, and a placard at the end of the runway, but I don't know that it even belongs in Title 19.
The
rudimentary drawings in Title 19, I attached them to my briefing memo. They just show channel areas of where you expect to see the traffic, you know, the 45 entry to the left downwind for 27, or the midfield entry. And then it states in there the traffic pattern is 1,000 feet. And that was an amendment that we had made when we shifted the traffic pattern in Carson City from 800 to 1,000 feet.
That's our opinion, but the point, that does not govern you as a pilot.
It doesn't, but the FAA's flight manual, and I also attached a portion of that to my briefing memo, says that all traffic patterns are 1,000 feet unless otherwise indicated. And so we wanted to make sure there were no indications out there of the old 800 feet, which apparently was in the old, that flight guide thing. I don't know if people still buy it, but, you know, that the little book. I think we're all pretty much electronic now, but that used to say 800 feet. And so we tried to clear all that language out because we wanted to be noise sensitive to our neighbors.
Well, again, these are guidances, not rules. I'm not aware of an FAR that says the pattern is at 1,000 feet. That may be a guidance or something in the AIM, but it's
in the AIM, but the AIM is adopted by the FAA. So you're right, it's still guidance from the FAA. I think the problem would probably occur is if you're outside of that guidance and something bad happens, then that's probably one strike against you. But I don't think that I think your point's well taken. I don't think you're obligated to fly the pattern. Certainly if you're in a light sport airplane or some smaller airplane, you may be flying it shallower simply because that is the right place to be to make the landing.
Mr. Schroeder, I apologize. Thank you for coming
that's
up.
okay. Bill Schroeder. One of the things that we looked at too, and I was going to address that too with Steve, is a standard in the industry. And that's, I think, what everybody looks at, especially when you talk about liability. And so what this is trying to do is just really standardize with the Airman's Information Manual so that everything's concise in that sense, so the pilot looking at it from anywhere in the country can take a look and say, okay, 1,000 feet is a standard pattern altitude with left turns, as we saw. The committee, just to give you a little bit of background on it, is kind of a committee made up of pilots here at Carson, made up of the FAA, made up of airport management, and other people who are interested, including people who live around the airport. And finding out what they were looking at and some of their concerns went into this as well. So when you take a look, for instance, on the noise abatement departure, you know, those of us that fly out of here a lot refer to that as the Walmart 1 departure. And all you do is just make the turn out, go to Walmart, and then fly out in that direction. It's a noise abatement, and it was put in place primarily for the residents that are up there at the west end of the airport. Again, it's voluntary. There's nothing that's mandatory about the noise abatement procedure. In fact, when I was on the Airport Advisory Committee at Minden, we went through this same situation, developed a traffic pattern for the runways at Minden. And basically what it is, it's a suggestion to pilots to basically become friendly with the community as they fly. But again, safety is a major issue. So a pilot can do whatever they need to do when they take off from Carson Airport or any other airport to maintain safety. That's their responsibility. So if they can't make the noise abatement turn, they don't have enough altitude to make the turn, whatever, they go straight out and then hit the crosswind and then depart the pattern. The idea here was the fact that Carson City now has quite a number of aircraft with different speeds. And the idea here was to try and keep the slower aircraft away from the faster aircraft, and at the same time, give pilots the opportunity to know who is in the pattern so that they could fit into the pattern in the most, or I would say the safest manner. For instance, if you have a trike flying in the left downwind for runway 27, and you have the state citation coming in behind that, they would know, we want to know there's a trike out there. And the idea behind that is that they're not going to fall in behind the trike, into the traffic pattern. They're going to step out away from the airport, further out, to allow for this smaller and slower aircraft to make a normal landing at the airport. Same thing with the light twins and single engine, which are faster, of course, than the trikes and some of the experimental aircraft. The other problem that we had was the fact that aircraft were using simply their aircraft identification numbers to enter into the pattern, both takeoffs and landings and entering the pattern. And when you use just your aircraft identification number, there's absolutely not a whole lot of information about what kind of aircraft you are. I'm Cessna 1234. Okay, Cessna 1234. Could be a P210. 1234. Which is much faster than a Cessna. What's the small one? Skycatcher. Yeah, or a 150. So what we determined was that we would be asking pilots, and we'd be posting this information to identify the type of aircraft they are when they come into the pattern. What that does is allows pattern aircraft already established in the pattern to get an idea of who's coming in. Again, the aircraft that are arriving to go into the pattern have an idea who's in the pattern, and they can therefore judge where they should be placed, so that we don't have conflicts of traffic, especially on the base to final turns, where you can have aircraft that are, they don't see each other, and they just turn at their normal location, and suddenly there's another aircraft that's below them or in front of them or whatever. That was a slower airplane. They just caught up with it. So this was a separation idea, and an idea to give pilots a heads up on what type of aircraft are flying into pattern. And I think it's good. It was again, it's all suggestion. But what we did at Minden, we actually published it, put it out, and it's there for pilots to look at. It's on the website. It's in other publications that are put out through the county. So pilots that are coming into the area, even non-local pilots, if they go to the website or pick up any kind of other information regarding the county, will get that airport traffic pattern plan. And I think the same thing can probably be done here, where it's something that you don't necessarily cast in stone, but you put it out there in the interest of safety. And that was the whole reason behind all of this, is just safety. It's not to inconvenience anybody or make anybody do anything that they don't really want to do. Because we have people who came in and said, well, this, FAA says this is the way you're going to do a traffic pattern. Well, yeah, it is, but you can do it in many different ways. And separation of traffic, especially by speed, is a very good idea to add a little bit of safety to the airport environment. So that's what went into this. And again, you mentioned that you'd had previous meetings on this. Did you have another meeting prior to this? Okay, okay. I'm sorry, I misunderstood that. But anyway, you've got some different situations here at Carson because you have these big rocks that sit up at the north side of the airport, Mount McClellan, and that really sort of limit what you can do on the north side of the field. So everything really has to be brought over to the south side of the field, and that's what's been done in the past. Right traffic for runway 9, left traffic for runway 27. And for those of us who have been here a long time, that taxiway that goes down there and that was one of the runways too. That was a good one. Good cross-rim runway.
Member Law, do you have a question?
I do. You were talking about Minden Airport and your involvement there. Does Douglas County also have a Title 19 type situation? And if so, the information that you published for the pilots, does it have to be included in that?
No, it's not included in that. It's not a Title 19.
Okay. Oh, otherwise. The communications you're talking about, making this aware of what kind of an airplane you're flying. When I received my flight instruction, that was one of the things that was drilled into me above all else. And I can tell you, as a fledgling female pilot 25 years ago, I can remember that when I was communicating on the airport, for the approach to the airport, there were gentlemen that I was flying into the pattern with who refused to speak on the radio. And so as instructors, I would caution all of you to beat that into the people, I mean, until they're black and blue, because there are still people who will not talk on the radio, and they're the most dangerous as far as I'm concerned.
I've had 2 incidents here while I was doing FAA flight checks where we had aircraft without radios or refusing to talk on the radio cut into traffic that was already on final approach low, and caused other aircraft, the ones I were in, caused to go around. So we have to watch out for that. But I think that encouraging radio communication in a non-towered airport is, I mean, that's very critical. You've got to be able to tell people, look, you got to talk. That's the only thing that keeps you safe here at these types of airports is communicating. Where are you? What are you doing? What are your intentions? And pilots need to know that. That's how they keep their aircraft away from other aircraft. So, yeah. So that's the plan. And all it does is separate the slower traffic from the faster traffic. And that was the idea behind it, for safety reasons.
Do you have any commentary from the members? I have a light here. Mr. White? No, not you. Okay. I have one down at the side.
Yeah, okay, looking at this pattern, it seems like the red line, which is the single engine and light twins, they're just be expected to be doing what they normally do anyway. Yes. Which is fine. And then we have the turboprops and the jets, and most of the people that operate those, they do fly at 1500 AGL, and you can expect them to be flying a wider pattern anyway. So we really don't have to make suggestions to them. But the ultralights are the ones that have the biggest difference in speed, the ones that create the biggest hazard. So it seems to me, I mean, I'm not against ultralight. I've flown a few myself. But it seems to me that if we just include it in a NOTAM or put it onto the ATIS, that there are ultralight aircraft operating in the vicinity. That would be a red flag for all the rest of the pilots to keep their eyes peeled. And then, watch out for them. Now, I know when I go into an airport that has glider activity or jumping activity, I really, really pay attention to what's out there. And I think that an ultralight warning would probably have the same effect.
May I address that? I think we had talked with Tim about going a voiceover on the AWOS. And on that AWOS, asking pilots to identify their type of aircraft as they come into the area. So when they tune up the excuse me, the AWOS, what they do is get that information prior to coming into the traffic pattern. So when they do come into the traffic pattern, they say what type of aircraft they are, along with the last 3 numbers on their aircraft. We have some pilots that don't use their numbers. And the reason they don't is a lot of times their planes are very identifiable. We have one that's the yellow Cherokee and the red Cessna, and they're very easy to see when they just use that type of an identifier. But you're very, very correct about the fact that when you come into an airport like this, if we have anything on there, Menden at one point put on, when they have high glider activity, like a glider fly-in, things of that nature, they do put that on their AWOS, that there's glider activity in the area. NorCal puts that out too when there's glider activity in the area, and it probably would behoove us to put that in as much information as we can possibly put, other than the menu at the restaurant, onto the AWAS, because we always criticize Reno. You know, they've got theirs to the point where their ADIS is just too long. So if the board sees that this is an acceptable plan, I think we've got a pretty good buy-in from the pilot community on it, and the appropriate notifications can be made on the website through postings of these traffic patterns at various locations around the airport. And I think it's going to help. I think it's going to help. It at least makes people aware of the fact that we have different types of traffic here: fast traffic, slow traffic, and medium traffic. So, anyway, that's it. Okay.
Any commentary or questions from the members of the authority? Seeing Steve, go ahead.
I just wanted to ask Bill if any thought was given. You know, the one thing that, as I'm sitting here looking at it, jumps out at me is we do have an approved GPS approach to the airport that's not shown on here and would be inconsistent with the traffic pattern. Did you guys talk about that at all, about just showing that on here?
We didn't, Steve.
Okay.
We did show it, no.
Okay. So Bill responded that they did not discuss it.
Yeah, we did not.
If you go to the mic, thanks.
No, we didn't discuss the GPS runway 27 approach coming in, but that is a circle to land approach.
No.
It's not a straight in approach.
Well, practically.
Under most circumstances.
Yeah, under most circumstances.
If you have an engine failure, it may be a straight in approach, but otherwise it's a circle to land.
The approach from the south is marked a circle to land, but the GPS 27 was designated. I mean, you'd have to drop really fast out of the sky, but it was designated as a straight-in landing.
I know it was. It's impossible to do.
One of the issues that did come up from the input that I received from tenants and instructors shooting the GPS 27 and the Alpha approaches was that they are practicing in VFR conditions. The GPS approaches themselves get you into VFR conditions. That's all they're ever designed to do because of our terrain. So I think that you have to treat it as VFR landing traffic once they're in. We didn't address it at the meeting, but I have had some back and forth about it, but there's really I saw no reason to add it to this, because most of the traffic that we see in the pattern on a VFR day is a VFR day. IFR days, you're not going to see them out there unless they're flying illegally. Or like today we had 2 jet departures that took the Jimpa 1 departure. But we were IFR this morning. So you're not going to see that during a VFR day normally.
And with that 27 approach as well, you can't land unless you can see the airport. So you have to be VFR in order to basically land the airplane here. So
then I guess the question is, if you're practicing the 27 approach, which is the only time I've ever flown it, and you've got because it's a VFR day and you've got a bunch of other traffic in it, you announce that you're doing a practice approach on the 27 GPS approach. Are these people who've been looking at this map going to know what the heck's going on?
no, they won't.
Yeah.
They won't, Steve. That's one thing that's just not on there. The people that are practicing the GPS approach are doing an approach from the northeast, and as they come into the airport, they would most likely come over the airport and then make a left turn over to the top of the airport, go out, do a 45, and come back into the pattern again.
Let me just speak to that. The guys flying the practice approaches, or real approaches for that matter, are obligated to not conflict with traffic in the pattern. That's the overriding rule that is in writing in the FARs. And just like if I say I'm 5 miles south, well, that's kind of a wide area. Somebody in the pattern may not know where I'm at. It's still my job not to hit him if he's in the pattern. So I don't know that we need to mark anything. And in an effort to kind of bring this home, I think what we have here is a map. It modernizes Steve's earlier work. It says, here's how we like to fly around here. recommended noise abatement procedures. But after that, we just back away and let the FARs tell these guys what to do and how to do it. Is there any more commentary at this point before we ask for public comment? Oh, I'm sorry, I can't, it's hidden. Yes, go ahead, Mr. Posse.
Okay, the only thing I wanted to bring up is the people that talk to me, because I'm at the airport every day, is the sport pilots and the weight shift pilots have no clue what those pilots are talking about when they're saying they're on that GPS approach out there. So it's an honest clarification that the people coming on that approach need to explain to these guys what they're doing, because you talk to these guys and they're saying, I've never heard of a GPS approach, and they're daytime VFR boys. So
you got a point, Steve, and that's one of the reasons that we encourage pilots to not basically say, I'm on the GPS runway 27 approach when they're in VFR conditions. What they'll say is, we're 3 miles, 4 miles, 5 miles to the northeast inbound for runway 27. That gives a position report rather than just saying, or using a waypoint out there. A lot of times I'll hear pilots that will announce they're at the waypoint. Well, VFR pilots have absolutely no idea where that waypoint's located. So we are encouraging pilots to use distances from the airport rather than use these waypoints that they see on the approach. They see them on their GPS, but announce your actual distance from the airport and your location as you're arriving. And that's about the only way we can do it.
I think one of the good things about the GPS 27 approach is that minimums for that approach is 500 feet above pattern altitude.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Do we have any other commentary from members of the public? I see the first hand farthest back. Well, that's all right, Bill. Come on, you're closer. We'll get to both of you.
We'll both get up here eventually.
I yield.
Hi, Bill Hartman again. I think this is a great idea. Certainly see it at other airports. You'll have handouts, things such as that, and I think it certainly adds to safety. Couple of questions. It's not uncommon in the AFD to have 2 altitudes shown, one for the turbine aircraft and the other one for the piston slappers as recommended altitudes. So, and I think that could go into the AFD. You see that for other airports pretty commonly. And the second thing is for the noise abatement headings. If my memory serves me correctly, and of course that's another issue that hasn't been agendized yet, that when we had the old runway here, we had signs there with the recommended departure headings for noise abatement. And that's commonly seen at other airports also. It's clearly a recommendation, but, you know, for noise abatement, you know, such and such a heading, or don't turn before whatever. And I would strongly recommend that we put those signs on our new runway that's consistent with what's shown on the picture there. It really helps. Pardon? Yeah, the old signs went out with the old runway. Yeah, they used to be there all the time, but when the new runway went in, all that stuff was removed and got the new runway here. So I know this strains your budget, but I think it's consistent with what we're trying to do here, and it adds to safety and making things nicer for the people in the community and such. And just a comment about coming in on the 27 approach. I say I'm 10 miles northeast over Dayton, or 5 miles northeast over Mound House, so it's really clear to people in the pattern what I'm doing out there. Because it's absolutely correct. People don't have a clue what the intersections are unless they're an IFR pilot and actually looking at the approach plate or memorized all those 5-letter intersections. Any questions? Okay.
I'm just curious, when you come in from Dayton, how do you enter the pattern?
Oh, I will do the, I think it's called the modified midfield, where you come down from the north, the green line that comes down there. Okay, because that works out really well. Pardon me?
You just fly over the top.
I'd fly over the top of the airport, north to south, and then I'll turn for the left-hand pattern for 27. If I'm going to come in on 9, I come to the south and enter on a right downwind for runway 9. Always announcing, of course, what I'm doing. But for 27, I'll come over the airport north to south, like the green line shows there. Okay? Let me check my notes. The speed bumps I talked about. That's it. Thank you.
I am Michael Greedy, and hopefully my notes are organized. I recommend the adoption of that graphic. I think that's the best presentation for the situation here. Perhaps not coincidentally, that basically is the traffic pattern recommendations in Advisory Circular AC 90-66A. Recommended standard traffic patterns and practices for aeronautical operations at airports without operating control towers. The recommendations, well, that graphic is almost taken from this with different pattern altitudes and distances. I'd like to read you one sentence from paragraph 8. Airport owners and operators, in coordination with FAA, are responsible for establishing traffic patterns. Takes care of that. We mentioned ultralight. I'd like to remind everyone that the airport facility directory for Carson City states ultralight activity on and in vicinity of airport. So I'll be taking care of that. Certainly, as Mr. Hartman pointed out, the data in the directory can be expanded. As to, I would recommend against attaching that into what we call Chapter 19, primarily for convenience, because that should be a living document. But I need to remind the authority that Chapter 19, traffic rules, has a description that's almost that, but not quite. It's not easily understood because it doesn't come right out and say traffic pattern altitude. It implies it, but it doesn't make any distinctions between the different types of operations that we're trying to do here. So my additional recommendation would be sit down and seriously think about the text we're going to publish. And I believe that's it. Thank you.
Having concluded the public comment, it's back to the, yes, Mr. Hartman.
I'm going to make you a deal, okay? Gary comes up with the supports for the signs for the noise abatement headings, and I'll come up with the signs. Can we do that?
You're a citizen. I don't know that I can say otherwise. As far as adopting it as a part of the official airport environment, I'd have to defer to Steve.
I don't think we're noticed for that activity, but that's certainly something that I think Mr. Hartman and Mr. Rowe can work out together.
Yeah. I know we're not noticed for it, no vote or anything like that, but I'll make that offer, so.
Give me a call in the next couple of weeks. I'll formulate something for the agenda. And yes, using PCV, we can do that. We've done it before.
Okay, sounds good.
Where did the old signs go?
Before my time.
I mean, the whole runway was removed, and the east end was moved further north. I mean, everything was just wiped out. So Who knows?
Bringing it back to the authority, or if there's no more comments, the chair would entertain a motion.
I'm going to change this recommended motion. I move we update the traffic pattern map for use at the Carson City Airport and authorize staff to post it to the website to take other such action to update Title 19 as a picture only, not a Title 19 change.
Well, I'll second that motion,
Can we do that?
if we can do it.
I just didn't understand exactly what you meant. Just take it out of Title 19 and just put it on the webpage, is that? No?
Put this in Title 19, but just exchange it for the picture that you originally put in there. There's no Title 19 requirement to update the picture, is there?
No, but if we change what's in Title 19, we are supposed to go through a process in which we amend Title 19. Title 19, by the way, is Carson City's municipal code, which we have adopted at the Airport Authority, so it would need to go through both of those processes. But I think somebody else's suggestion of just taking it out of Title 19 might be the easier solution and just posting it on the webpage.
Let me just speak to taking out of Title 19, which is what I suggested. The FAA owns the air. Carson City does not. Any verbiage in a city municipal code is not regulatory for pilots in the air. So to me, it's a redundant location. If we have met our duty by working with the FAA to recommend a traffic pattern and posting it where pilots can find it via AFD or NOTAMs or anywhere else, I think we've met our highest obligation to meet safety and to inform the pilots. Putting it in Pilot 19, I don't think adds anything other than leaving one more thing to periodically maintain if we ever do something else with this pattern. So I would amend his motion to delete traffic pattern conversations from Title 19.
Since I seconded the motion, I would agree with that. And I'd like to also add that I don't think very many pilots, either local or otherwise, take their guidance from Title 19.
Okay, we have a motion. It has been amended. The second has accepted the amendment. Do we have any further discussion from the members of the authority? And seeing none, I'm going to call for a vote. All in favor?
Aye.
Against?
Aye.
It passes unanimously. Moving on. Airport engineers report. Mr. Clegg.
Okay, well, I handed out my engineer's report. I also emailed it last week. On the first page is the schedule that we have established for the project, and we fell behind by about a week because we've been adding some additional work. But the overall schedule, I believe we're still on track. What's really dependent on whether this schedule is met is how long it takes the FAA to review the design that we've sent them. So essentially what's happening here with the budget is that the FAA has programmed $2,892,188 towards this project. That equates to a total budget of $3,085,000. So working with budgets for the construction management as well as the airport administration during the project, that kind of limits our resources for construction. So the only variable here is the construction cost, and so what we have done is put in 3 deductive alternatives so that we can bring this project into budget if necessary. And those deductive alternatives are Number 1 would be the perimeter fence. Number 2 is the apron lighting. And number 3 is improvements to the access road off of Arrowhead Drive. And none of those have a priority. It's just we would use any combination necessary to make this thing meet budget and keep it on track. So with that, that's really all I have to report. Any questions?
Seeing no questions from the members, do we need public comment on the engineer's report? Mr. Takis? I didn't think so.
It's an informational
It's
item.
informational. This leads us to our manager's report. Mr. Rowe?
I really have nothing to add for the report, but if there's any questions on anything regarding the airport, maintenance or operations, I'd be happy to answer.
Legal counsel?
Nothing to add.
Treasurer?
As of December 31, 2015, a beginning balance of $6,974, deposits of $64,430. We spent $22,377. We have a balance in the checkbook of $49,028. On-hand cash, savings, and checkbook, $595,724.
Any questions for Mr. White? Member reports. Mr. Stotts?
No report from me.
Mr. Posick?
We have to thank one of our board members for our delicious additive to the board meeting.
Mr. Shirk? Mr. White, any more?
No, sir.
I have none. We get to the end where we're looking for any more public comment. Seeing none, do we have any proposals or requests for agenda items for the next regular meeting?
I'll put an item on approving, I'll be more specific as to what needs to change in Title 19, the elimination of those 2 pages. I want to go through and make sure there aren't other references to those pages that need to come out. And then I'll ask you to vote on that, and then I can take that to the City Board of Supervisors.
Madam Law.
Do we want to put an agenda item on as a report for the meeting that we have within the next week on the building?
That'd be completely acceptable. We'll have a report back from whoever shows up. I have all of your email addresses. I'm in communication with Chairman Hutter, so whenever we kind of pick a date, I'll communicate to everyone. We have to be careful about having a quorum there, so we'll pick that up as it bounces. That brings us to everybody's favorite motion.
Adjourn.
Done.